Welcome to today's webinar. More Than Selling Compounds is presented by Dr. Sean Hodges, President of the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, also known as APC. APC is a nonprofit advocacy regulatory organization that represents thousands of pharmacy compounders. The mission of APC is to protect, promote, and advance the art of pharmacy compounding, primarily by networking with state and federal stakeholders who make an impact on patient access to compounded medications. Dr. Hodges graduated with a doctorate in pharmacy from Texas Tech University School of Pharmacy in 2001. Upon graduation, he was awarded a one-year fellowship program with Eli Lilly, focusing on the drug approval process and serving as a regulatory liaison between the FDA and Lilly. Upon completion of the fellowship, Sean practiced pharmacy in a community setting and worked as a regional director for the nation's largest hospice pharmacy provider. Currently, he is a pharmacist and owner of Innovation Compounding, a compounding-only pharmacy located just outside of Atlanta that employs 39 pharmacy team members. Sean also consults with practitioners and their patients on men's health, women's health, and pain management. Today's webinar is accredited through ACPE and is worth 1 CE credit hour. CE credit is applied following completion of an evaluation link found on the last slide in the presentation handout. You can find the handouts on the lower portion of the GoToWebinar toolbox under Handouts. We are recording this session today and will include the recording and evaluation link in a follow-up email. Questions may be submitted throughout the webinar using the GoToWebinar toolbox on the right side of your screen under the Questions tab. We will answer the questions submitted following the presentation. If we do not get to your question today, a list of questions and answers will be emailed to all attendees following the webinar. Thank you for joining today's session.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for attending this morning. Amy yesterday had sent out an email of the registrations, and it looks like we had about 250 plus folks that are interested. So I take it that we're all really interested in learning about how we can grow our pharmacy practices. So again, Amy, thank you to you, ARL, as well as LECO. A lot of you on this slide right here, you probably will see on the left-hand side, we got a lot of logos here. The one on the far left is Innovation Compounding and ARL and LECO, who you know. But thank you all. We have a lot to cover for today. Today is really more about pharmacy sales design and how we, here at Innovation, how we've kind of constructed our sales team, how we work with a lot of our customers and identifying who our true customers are. And so what we want to do really for today is just share with you what our experiences have been, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. When you look at the disclosure here, we have no conflicts of interest, no apparent or financial interest. And for today, when we talk about pricing, it won't be tied to anything specific products to avoid the perception of collusion or competitive advantages. This has been a one ACP accredited one contact hour. And as like Amy mentioned, you can take that upon completion of today's session. And so for objectives, we want to first really identify the role of the sales team members. That's both in the perspective of physicians or patients. What can they do to help generate value for our prescribers and also the patients that we all serve. Also is to develop an effective sales strategy and a strategic plan. A lot of us kind of have a sales team in place and we tell them to go out and sell. But a lot of it, we don't know exactly how well they're performing or what our key points are. By developing an effective sales strategy plan, you've essentially established metrics in which you can monitor the performance and successes of each sales team member. The next is develop specific metrics, which we'll talk about. We also have some tools. I think Amy and ARL had sent out two tools that can be of use to your pharmacy practice there. One of them is kind of a review of how we handle our weekly meetings. And then the second is more about how you can develop a sales strategic plan and covering what your true goals are, what your objectives are, and how you're going to achieve those goals. And then finally, what we already mentioned is identify the tools that support the sales representatives and the managers and managers really how to become efficient in their ability to manage sales reps. And really this presentation is a lot to do if you're a small independent pharmacy or if you're a sophisticated nationwide pharmacy. Ideally, this presentation would be a benefit to you. we've gone through in the last 13 years of innovation compounding's existence. We've gone through the good and the bad and the ugly. We're not a proud pharmacy in the fact that we don't mind sharing our histories, both good and bad. And but in terms of offering this presentation, we really want the compounding profession to grow. Yes, we're all competitors, but at the end of the day, we still need to be relevant. We're taking on a lot of activity on what many of you viewed as overregulation, and that can be an issue. And so what we need to do is to remain vigilant in our compounding abilities, obviously, but also vigilant in our sales abilities as well. And so what we believe is that growth in an industry will actually spur investment into our profession. We want those that supply us to continue to have confidence in our industry and confidence in the pharmacy profession. And obviously the timing is perfect. If anybody has undergone a sales strategy development plan, typically you're starting that plan in the fourth quarter of the year to get ready for a successful 2021 in this case. And so we're going to give you some tools that you can start to have that conversation with all the key players that are involved in the sales process. And again, it's not just your sales reps, but it could also be your pharmacists, it could be some technicians, and that sales strategic plan can identify who your key players are. Some few assumptions, actually. We're assuming that you want to grow your pharmacy, and perhaps you have a sales rep, or if you're a pharmacist and you don't, you are the sales rep. But this is really more about if you're willing to get away from the counter and get beyond the counter to get in the face of your prescribers as well as the patients. If you are a pharmacist, or if you actually work with a pharmacist who is comfortable in talking about the clinicals with physicians, and we'll talk a little bit more about the role of the clinicals in just a minute, but really talking about in the context of medical science liaisons, if you're familiar with that term, where you have sort of a think tank of pharmacists that are able to communicate certain data points on certain products to the physicians and share them the appropriate amount of evidence. And this presentation today is really only in the context of pharmacy, pharmacy compounding. While the skill sets themselves can be transferable to other aspects of pharmacy or even beyond pharmacy, most of today's narrative will be really around just pharmacy compounding. And finally, definitely one of the more important aspects is that the reps themselves are paid employees of the pharmacy. I'll go ahead and share with one of our uglies. Historically, as a cash-only pharmacy, we thought, oh, well, we can work with some 1099s. Even aside from the legalities on that, we've learned a long time ago that 1099s didn't work well for us, only for the fact that you're only limited in what you can control for a 1099 rep. So moving forward from that point, we decided to go ahead and just bring on full-time employee sales reps. So for review of the key terms for today, a lot of it we're going to be talking about sales. Marketing in itself will be its own presentation. In fact, I think that may be discussed during a future webinar, but really for today, we're talking about the sales efforts. Sales is really its own entity. Your level of effort from the individual employees, those are dedicated full-time positions if you had the budget in your budget to do so. And we'll also talk about the roles of key individuals in the practitioner's office. So you have a gatekeeper. That is the person that's right there at the physician's office at the front, usually the front-facing individual. You have the influencer, someone that's able to kind of influence the decision maker. Sometimes it's the nurse, sometimes it could be somebody else. And then you have your decision maker. That's the one that decides to move forward with your pharmacy or not. And most of us assume that it is the prescriber, and a lot of times that it is the prescriber or a physician, but a lot of times it's not. It depends on the hierarchy of the pharmacy or the physician practice that you work with. It also depends on the ownership as well of the practice. Sales strategic plan, which we'll cover a lot of today, it really covers the goals and the objectives, and hopefully establishes some predictability in what your revenue is. Obviously, you're looking for a return on your investment. You're willing to put the time and effort into developing a plan and executing on that plan. You want some sort of benchmark at the end of all this to say, okay, was this really worth all their effort? And then we'll talk about campaign development plan as well. That is a separate plan that which we've looked at. One interesting definition that I looked at was a set of practices organized around a specific sales objective within a limited time frame. And really that type of campaign development is a little bit more granular. Usually your sales reps are the ones that are devising or conjuring the campaign development that dictates where you're going to market, what you're going to market, and who your key physicians and decision makers are. Interchangeably, a lot of times historically, and we've been guilty of this as well, as we've sort of interfaced the term account management and new business development. If you look at sort of those definitions, they're actually separate definitions, and if you Google it, there's actually a lot of variations on those definitions. In the context of today's presentation, our experience is account management is one that's already working with an active prescriber. That's somebody that is already sending in prescriptions. They've already established a relationship with your pharmacy. They're confident in who you are and your capabilities of your pharmacy, and they understand who you are in terms of branding and identity. New business development would be something a little bit more about the granular level of effort to bring on new additional business. So working with prescribers that may have not heard of you before, or even prescribers that you've worked with before in the past that for whatever reason has gone to a competitor, and you're looking to bring them back on to your pharmacy. If there is any sort of takeaway message, is that really this slide right here is that you have really 4 key components for what we believe is an effective plan. Right now, this is a accumulation of about 19 years of sort of sales experience in 3 different industries. Like Amy mentioned, the biography. This is something, some of these skill sets we've acquired through our experiences with Eli Lilly. I was on the Cialis marketing team at that time, learning about the regulations. Then after that, I worked for a major hospice pharmacy provider that also hired a couple of consultants and kind of taught us about actually the importance of sales strategy and development plan, and also sales campaign. And then we applied those skill sets to when we bought the pharmacy here 13 years ago. And as we continue to grow, we always go back to this particular slide. And what's important about this slide here is that just like your QA programs or anything else, sales is a continuous process. A lot of times people think that because we're doing compounds, that compounding is a transactional relationship with the prescriber. Really, compounding sales is more of a relationship development. So your reps and out there, if you're calling on your prescribers or working with your patients, there's always this constant reminder to let them know that you exist, let them know that you have new products that are available, that you've seen experiences with for the patients, that have benefited the patients. And so it's more of a relationship sales. And because it is a relationship sales, having a circular or a cyclical relationship and call plan works well for that model. If you notice in the middle there, it says success of sales plans increases with team involvement, and that's absolutely true. There's many ways to devise your sales plan and your sales team, but I will say, as a practicing pharmacist, I think it's very important to bring your pharmacist into the equation. Big Pharma has done that for almost 20 years now that I've known, where they have these medical science liaisons that are essentially pharmacists. They may be prescribers or nurses, advising the general health community about the efficacy of their products. And that's really a transferable skill set that we've seen. And I will say, from our perspective on what we've done here at Innovation, it's really the relationships between the prescribers and the pharmacists that have done well. So if you are a sales rep and you're out there and you're calling on physicians, and you have a pharmacist that's able to communicate with a physician, leverage their skill sets and their clinical acumen. That will definitely pay dividends in the long run for everybody. So before you even get into a sales strategy and plan development, what do you really need to sort of the ingredients to bake this cake? Well, when you develop that sales strategy plan, we're working under several assumptions that you already have an identity and a brand to who you are. Perhaps you're the local community independent pharmacy. That's your identity. The identity doesn't even have to be about the pharmacy. It could be about the pharmacist. And so when you're engaging in your marketing and sales efforts, perhaps you or your sales team are advising the prescribers to talk about who you are as a pharmacist and your experiences. We've had some pharmacists that have done very well on a national level, that really just because they talked about how they are the expert opinion leaders in some of these subject matters in certain disease states. Others may say, you know what, we're a local community pharmacy. And really what you're trying to message there is that you're part of the community. You're there to support local patients. And that's just another way of how you want to brand and identify yourself. But really that identity ideally would come from leadership. That's who you want it to be. And the importance behind having that brand and identity is that you want it to permeate through your whole team, whether it be operations or sales or admin offices, is that to give those folks the Kool-Aid, if you will, and making sure that they understand what the identity of the pharmacy is. Today we're going to use an example just because we want to make sure we're not engaged in any sort of collusion. I have an artificial compound that we're going to talk about. It's going to be called magic goo. That's actually a name that somebody, an athlete up in the Northeast at college said, "Sean, I love your magic goo." I said, well, that's a great name. I can't trademark a compound, but I'm going to use that someday, and today's that day. Help the sales team establish an elevator speech is key as well. I don't know if anybody's ever gone through that process, but if you ever to go to a sales rep or anybody and say, okay, tell me in 30 seconds or less what your pharmacy does, can they do it? And more importantly, is the message the same from sales rep A to sales rep B to your technician to your pharmacist? You want continuity in that messaging, and so really the leadership should develop that elevator speech. That will be reflection of the identity of the company. Messaging does involve about who you are, who you serve, why you serve them, and the benefits to those that you serve. And then usually enveloped in that is about some degree of access, quality, and ironically, cost is, in our world, cost is less. That innovation is seen. Every year we do a survey of our prescribers and patients, and if you look at the right-hand side of your screen here, most important to them, number one, was customer service. They wanted to access somebody, they want to access a pharmacist, they wanted to talk to somebody, to be available for their consultations. This whole thing about compounding to the patients and sometimes prescribers is completely new to them. So they need somebody to walk them through and take them through that process of what compounds are, how to use their medications, expected side effects, and whatnot. The other second most important was access. We had 90% of our recipients, or those that completed the survey, identify that turnaround time is important to them. And I think a lot of that is that Amazon experience. They're wanting their medication shipped, and they also want transparency. So the fact that, hey, can you send me a refill on a medication? They don't hear from a pharmacy, and if you're mailing it or if you're shipping it to them and it takes 2 to 3 days, they're thinking, why hasn't it gotten there yesterday? Well, they want some sort of transparency behind that. So access to not only the medication, but access to the information in real time has been important for a lot of patients. So if there's an area for a pharmacy to kind of look in to help develop and sophisticate your software systems, that would be really beneficial, and both to the patient as well as your pharmacy team, because they're not having to pick up the phone so much to answer the patients about tracking their package. So the next is, before you even can enter the sales strategic plan, is really to identify your targets. And the question is who are you going to market more to or sell? Are you going to market more? Or are you going to sell more? And it really isn't a right or wrong answer. It really depends on what your budget is and what you're willing to spend. We've kind of looked at it as a balanced approach here. We almost do a 50-50 in terms of marketing and sales efforts. But in our world, what we look at is our customers are the prescribers. And so for the most part, in what we do and how we offer our compounds, that we work specifically with doctors. And so the rest of the sales presentation will be under the assumption that your customers are your physicians as well. Our patients are still our patients. It doesn't mean that they're getting discounted. We still are able to give them the TLC. But for the most part, in terms of devising and conjuring our sales strategy plan and campaign development plan, again, it's focused around the prescribers. I will say what is interesting about what we've recently discovered, probably in the last 5 years, is that certain exceptions apply, that it would actually be more beneficial to spend your energy marketing straight to the patients. One example that we've identified was sexual health, which we thought was really interesting. When we did some research on that to find out why, we found out that it's really lifestyle conditions are really those that are affected by the patients. And in turn, when you have a patient that's affected by, say, sexual health or certain skin conditions, they want to look and feel good, or anything that's a lifestyle condition, it becomes a patient-driven consumer demand. In fact, when we looked at it, I came across this interesting chart here that if you see on the right-hand side, in the erectile dysfunction industry, the highest spent was actually on direct-to-consumer or end-user advertising. They actually spent more on DTC advertising than they did to detail into healthcare practitioners, because they understood that giving the patients that information to make the decision that they themselves would need to be on therapy and have that conversation with their prescriber, Big Pharma has realized, okay, we're going to essentially market to the patients. Hence, that's why I have a nice little photo of former Senator Bob Dole. For those of you that remember, he came out in the late 90s and talked about his personal life condition situation. which at that time paid pretty good dividends for the ED industry, and to the point where he really helped become the spokesperson, and that was wound up being, to the most part, his identity. The other piece is setting up your team for success, and obviously this has a lot to do with what your budget is. And so if you have a field sales team, that's great. If you have an in-house account managers, that's fine. That's how we work. We have a field sales team, and ideally their job is to conjure the new business development. But once the practice is comfortable with us, they know who we are, then we try to keep it into the in-house account managers. And those in-house account managers are picking up the phone, they're contacting the prescribers just to let them know that we exist, just to make sure that they're doing well, making sure that they've heard if the medications are working for their patients, have their patients reported any feedback to the prescribers. And then again, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, but having medical liaisons, which are usually your practicing pharmacists, is key. If you have a pharmacist on staff, or if you are a pharmacist, I would absolutely say that you possess a massive amount of value to your prescribers that would actually bode well to help the sales efforts. And so sharing with the physician on the level of evidence that's out there. Obviously, as a medical liaison, specifically with pharmacists, we know what the rules and regulations are on appropriately communicating that, advising the physicians these are not FDA approved drugs. And so I will say, if you're a sales rep and you're an employee of the company or a pharmacist, and anything that's said that falls outside the regulations, it doesn't matter who the employee said it, the pharmacy is liable. So typically for us, we do put guardrails in place to make sure that the reps don't talk beyond what they're allowed to say in terms of regulations and compliance. Again, advising that they haven't been evaluated by the FDA. And our pharmacists are very comfortable having that conversation with our prescribers as well. Other miscellaneous to-dos I think is worth noting is working in concert with your marketing team. We're not going to talk about marketing and creating a marketing plan as well, but I think it is important to note that marketing is part of specifically the campaign development process. It's a very dynamic situation with marketing, where marketing is feeding back to the sales folks to advise on what products are being produced and when. Typically, I would recommend, if you look at health conditions of the month, specifically healthline.com, that gives you every month the breakdown of what disease states and what the disease of the month is. And so we reference that. That's collectively going to be on everybody's thoughts. Other organizations and entities are putting energy behind the awareness. And so as pharmacists, we can take advantage of that as well. The other piece, and we talked a little about earlier, was surveying your customers. That is something that we do, I try to do on an annual basis. We did that survey that I mentioned about cost and access being very important in customer access. 5 years ago, that wasn't quite the same. Although access was important to them, they still wanted customer service, but cost was a little bit higher. It was a little bit more important for them before than it is today, which we thought was interesting. So let's get into the new business development strategic plan. This is actually a plan that really involves everybody that has the ability to achieve revenue for the company. So this is going to be, you're a pharmacist. It could be if the owners are not pharmacists and they're part of the equation, that's on there. Your lead technicians on there, obviously your sales and marketing folks. You really want everybody in there. And I have on here DoorDash as well, because it winds up being a 3-day crash course on what we're going to target for next year. So during here, you want to identify what products that you think that will be beneficial to your patients. You want to know how you're going to get that word out, who are your true customers, and also sets the expectations on how much the pharmacy can take on in terms of prescription counts. Are we going beyond our capabilities as a pharmacist? And that has happened before in the past. But also starts to assign some general roles and expectations of each team member as well. You have these team members that are working in concert. A lot of folks say, hey, we got sales team is the sales team, the operations team is the operations team. Reality, those two departments do need to work together, and sometimes there's conflict. A lot of times sales reps like to overpromise and underdeliver. Operations says, no, we can't do that, and obviously they're getting their products out in a timely manner, starting to exceed expectations. But what it does on that sales strategic development plan, once you've identified all your objectives, what products that you want to introduce, who your targets are going to be, your sales reps should start to think about pipeline management. We do have 2 attachments that are included under today's presentation. I found a really interesting one recently. It's called HubSpot's sales plan, sales strategic plan. Feel free to download it. It's a great template. Essentially, it's designed to help ask the questions and for you all to complete. So pipeline development is a huge aspect of sales strategic development plan. This is really an opportunity for us to see what the true opportunity is for in terms of potential revenue. So I have a case, a what if scenario here. And again, we talked about that magic goo being a line of just fictitious compounds that we're looking to do. And you have a revenue goal here. It says $250,000 that you're looking to achieve in revenue. I put that number up again just for artificial purposes. It's not tied to any specific compounds again. I will say $250,000 is actually an artificially low number if you're going to have a dedicated sales rep. From budgeting purposes, from our experiences, I don't think you'd be very successful if your rep can only generate less than $250,000 in a year. The average prescription price of your newly developed compound, again, the magic goo, let's just say it's set at $70. The treatment protocol with this product is about 6 to 8 weeks in length. So all that being said, with that magic goo at that price point to achieve $250,000, you need a total of 3,572 prescriptions annually, both new and refill prescriptions. If you just making several assumptions off of here, if you have a prescriber that generates 4 prescriptions per week, that winds up being obviously 4 times 52, 208 prescriptions per year. And you're thinking, okay, let me calculate that out. Let me back that out. Prescriptions annually divided by the number of prescribers. You only really need 18 prescribers. Doesn't really sound like a lot. However, getting to 18 active prescribers can be a little bit of a challenge, especially for a new product that is compounded, that's handicapped by the ability to talk about its claims of efficacy. So let's figure out how many prescribers that your sales team would need to touch to get to 18 prescribers. Before I do that, let me get back up to this top here. You see 4 stages. And there's different pipeline tools that are out there. Ours may be viewed as oversimplified, but it works well for us. Lead is defined as just anybody that has the ability to write a compound, whether it's they treat the condition that would qualify to be on magic goo or not. Qualified lead would be that you've done a little bit of due diligence and you've identified that, yes, this prescriber could write for magic goo. Opportunity is a little bit more of an action by the prescriber. The prescriber has noted, yes, I could write for magic goo and I'm interested in learning a little bit more. Active prescriber or active account in our world is somebody that's actually submitted a prescription. So if you look at that in terms of a pipeline development, as a manager, this is actually really key to see how well your sales team is performing. This is more of a qualitative as much as it is as quantitative. And if you have a qualified lead, somebody again that's expressed somebody that has the ability to write for magic goo, and you have a conversion rate to an opportunity where they have actually noted back to you to say, yes, I would like to write prescriptions for this, or I'm interested. Let's just say it's at a 20% conversion rate, which is pretty low, but I think your sales reps may actually tell you that's actually pretty true. They're calling on a lot of physicians. And then if you have an opportunity and then they actually write that first prescription and it's a 30% conversion, if you plug in the numbers on that conversion rate, you would need about 300 qualified physicians to get to your 18 active prescribers. That's a big change. So we'll talk a little bit later about metrics and tools, but manipulating the or adjusting your conversion rates and increasing your conversions is actually key, which is again is more of a qualitative, and that would see what you can do to work with your rep to increase those numbers as much as it is to identify a larger pipeline. So let's take that 18 prescribers, and now that we've identified in your sales strategic plan, you've got a product, you've got enough of a market base to cover it. Now start thinking about a sales campaign development. So now you have 18 prescribers. Let's do this. This is really driven by the new business development rep. What I like about the rep driving this is that that actually gives you, in terms for the managers, the indication of how well you think that they know their territories. Not only just their territories, but the confidence in their prescribers that can write for it. What I like about it is that if they give you the numbers, what we do is, what we've done historically here is that we actually make that part of their commission plan. So if we say, all right, you think you can do this, you need to show us that you can do it. and you'll receive your appropriate compensation for your level of effort. I will say what's impressive is always to follow the path of least resistance, and that's hopefully something that your reps already know off the top of their head. If this is a product and your prescribers already have a relationship, those are probably the first folks that you want your reps to target, is your active prescriber. If you look at these numbers here, these are our own experiences. Our reps, if they have to contact a new prescriber, and the word encounter is really either in the phone call, even if they got hung up by the gatekeeper, or if you visit with the gatekeeper and said, I'll relay your message, that's all defined as an encounter in our world. But if you have the number of encounters that for a new prescriber to learn about who you are, it takes about 8 contacts or 8 encounters, versus somebody that already knows who you are, that lives and breathes your pharmacy and is proud to work with your pharmacy, usually takes about 3 encounters. So if you think about the level of effort and the time to get the interest, it's always best to organically grow your business rather than go try to capture new business from a new prescriber. That being said, you still need your new prescriber involvement. You still need your pipeline management, just in case your current prescribers fall off for whatever reason, you're still fueling your pipeline. Which is interesting also, we looked at a budget, and it's almost a 5-fold change from the level of effort to prescribing and reaching out to new prescribers versus current prescribers. And so it is substantially more costly to the pharmacy to get the new prescribers. Again, not any less important, but working with them, you still have to get your new prescribers on board. But again, focusing on your active prescribers is key. Also, the campaign development is a 3-week build-up process. And so a lot of times, and we made this mistake, is saying, all right, we've got this product. Next week, we're going to go out in detail. Sales rep hits the road. They've got all their little marketing information with them and whatnot in their handouts. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit more strategic involvement than that. Really what needs to happen is there needs to be a lot of planning that needs to take place even 3 weeks before, and sometimes 6 if your reps require overnight travel just to keep your costs down. Your campaign lead up development can take about up to 6 weeks. But let's just say we have a local rep. Our pharmacy is located in North Atlanta, so we're just going to pick on North Atlanta. This is just a hypothetical. But the first week in February, my sales rep has said, you know, I'm going to call on North Atlanta. I've marked out 30 practices total that I would like to call on for that week. And they can get to 30 practices in that week because it's a condensed territory. If you reside, if your pharmacy is located more rural, I understand that'd be a little bit more challenged. And your reps may have to do a little bit more long driving just to fulfill their pipeline. But you know that you could have in that area in North Atlanta, you have 75 leads, you have another 25 qualified leads, as well as 5 actives in that territory that could write for Magic Goo. So your rep is probably advising they should at least get that first week in February, they should get in front of 3 active prescribers, another 30% of all the qualified leads, in this case, roughly 8. And then the balance, they should be doing about 19 cold calls for the week. And so we do want our reps to be out there. It's obviously sales and marketing is a very expensive endeavor. This is something that you have, if you're going to invest the money and you want to see a rate of return or return on investment pretty quickly. So ideally, your reps hopefully are calling on 30 practices per week. And we understand that there's a lot of follow-up, there's a lot of home office time. And so to get to 30 practices a week is a little bit of a challenge. But sometimes that can get made up for if your reps are attending conferences and they have 100 reps or 100 clients that they met with. That constitutes as 100 practices that they have the ability to contact. So for the actives, ideally you're scheduling in advance. You are working with them. They are the anchor appointments. And so what we do is we reach out to our actives first, get them on the books first. Those are the first phone calls. And then we kind of sequentially roll away from that. So if someone says, okay, I've got 3 actives, I'm working on them, then you got your 25 qualified leads that we'll try to target next, obviously. And then to fill in the gaps, if you will, then you would leverage your 75 leads to see if they actually would qualify themselves. So again, this all takes place, this campaign, even though they're on the road at the first week in February, hopefully they're starting this call process and setting up their appointments in January. So the next week is usually just a follow-up from the first week, and that's important. Is you want to have a blend of calling on, again, additional new practices in the second week, but then also have those reps follow up from the first week. And so once you've expressed interest with the prescriber at that time, time is actually not on your side. The level of interest does go down over time, it's typically, and that's pretty well documented. So it's a challenge for your reps to make sure that the instant pipeline that they just developed at that time, those new qualified leads, that they get in front of them as much as they possibly can to push them down from qualified lead to opportunity to active as quick as possible. Because again, usually the level of interest does decline over time. So meeting with the prescriber there's a lot here. In fact, this could be its own presentation. And so we're going to hit some high level reviews here. And as we mentioned in the title of the presentation, this is really where it's much more than just selling compounds. Ideally, your reps should be thinking about being as far as problem solvers. That absolutely is true. If anybody's gone to a sales seminar, problem solving, and we've seen that to be true in our experience as well. In our world, more specifically, pharmacy compounding has the opportunity to be part of the plan. And so our prescribers think about that. Our healthcare practitioners think about SOAP note formats, SOAP being subjective, objective assessment and plan. And that's how our reps should think. Why think any differently? So a lot of times our reps should be asking questions that go down the SOAP note process. Help the physician identify what patients they experience that are giving them troubles, advising on some objective information on what's available in the marketplace, helping the physician to say further delineate those patients that would need therapy that's not commercially available under assessment, and then plan is the pharmacy compounding aspect. Having pharmacy be part of the solution, and again, having that rep think like a prescriber goes a long way. Ideally, before some tactics with the sales rep is to set the agenda beforehand. A lot of times sales reps will just go in, even if it's a scheduled meeting, they really need to identify what the agenda is, make sure that at least the influencer has an understanding of what the agenda is. You really want to turn the influencer into an ally. So whatever you can do to make that influencer look good is absolutely key. Understand what the influencer's soft points are. Understand what that influencer likes, doesn't like. Do they like to work in the morning? Are they a morning person? Are they not? Since they're the ones that have a huge, obviously decision maker makes the final decision, but the influencer is absolutely key. So never discount your influencer. A couple of other additional tactics is to get your questions prepared before the meeting. You already know what the meeting is going to be about. If you're a sales rep, you've done this, you've had these meetings hundreds of times, you already know what the questions are going to be. And in turn, you're going to already be prepared for what they call obstacle handling. So go ahead and just generate some questions before you go in. Some generic questions is, Doc, I've heard from several physicians that options to treat XYZ condition are limited. Again, the S in SOAP note. What are you seeing? It's an open-ended question. Our physicians will be more inclined to answer that question, at least to validate or refute. And at that point, it helps set the narrative and future discussions and future questions. So if you're getting a little bit more pointed on your question, if you're trying to drive home the solution, a question could be, if your patients had access to a medicine that could be a help with XYZ condition, would that be of interest to you? It's a little bit more of a yes or no question. However, it does give you an indication of the physician's level of interest. One thing that we've noticed in sales reps, especially our newer sales reps, they tend to get a little nervous and they like to fill the gap by talking. I've been guilty of that as well. I don't think there's anybody on the planet that's told me I don't talk too much. Reps do most of the talking, and really the most effective reps should just do the questions and pause. Ask the one question and then absolutely pause, and followed by active listening. Let the decision maker and influencers feel good about what they do, remind them that they're important, that their job is to help patients, and the sales rep's job is to help them look good in front of their patients. The other piece to getting prepared is to rehearse their elevator speech that we talked about in the identity portion of the presentation. So going back to that, as soon as they go into that agenda, and the physician doesn't know who the rep is, that rep should be absolutely knowledgeable of that elevator speech that they know like the back of their hand. Specifically the interest speech and the position statement. And the position statement is worded correctly, it'll actually note what the benefits are to the prescribers and the patients within the statement itself. And the other thing too is that what we've seen a lot of times when reps, especially with COVID now, they're getting rejected a lot. We've had a lot of rejections. I don't know if in your pharmacies your sales reps have experienced the same. usually because of policies and fear of transmittal of the disease itself. We understand that. So our sales reps are truthfully having a little bit of a hard time for a while there under getting our hands around how we're going to continue to move forward with so many doors being shut in our face right now. But we do advise them, prepare for rejection, but don't assume it will be so. Keep at it. There are still some opportunities out there to be had. So once the rep has met with the healthcare practitioner and the staff, never discount the gatekeeper and influencers. So part of your follow-up plan should always involve the gatekeeper influencers. Treat them like they are the physician, treat them like they are prescriber. We've had some instances where we thought the gatekeeper was just some sweet lady at the front of the desk. It wound up being the prescriber's mom. So that you never discount that, never make assumptions about their roles are within the practice. Don't always assume that the prescriber is a decision maker as well. In fact, it's fair to ask to say, how do you go about your process to adding new products to your clinical protocols? Is that done by you, Mr. or Mrs. Physician, or do you have a P&T committee that looks at how you develop your treatment programs? Again, your sales rep should sell the service. Compounding is a solution-based industry or a profession. We're not detailing specific products per se. And again, reps should leverage their pharmacist clinical acumen as part of the solution. I do apologize about the space there. I don't know how that came in. Don't just talk about features. Benefits to the physicians should be what they want to hear. And if you're a really good sales rep, you can understand what that physician's soft points are by the way they tell them. Are they really wanting to treat their patients and that's their biggest concern, or is their personal workload overwhelming? Regardless, if you can discern between the two, you can actually frame some solutions that's beneficial to them in the form of benefits. So for instance, this magic goo doesn't burn when applied to the skin, so your patients should be more compliant. Or this magic goo doesn't burn when applied to the skin, so you won't hear many complaints from your patients. So meeting with the healthcare, just to recap, I know I want to leave some room for some questions here, but obviously recap the agenda. If the reps only have 3 minutes at a time, set it for 3 minutes on their time. Don't go to 4 minutes or 5 minutes. Those physicians or prescribers do remember that. So they need to know that you have their confidence that your meeting will only last 3 minutes. And in fact, sometimes we will actually have a stopwatch to advise that, okay, our 3 minutes are up. We'll follow up with you next time. Again, going back to the SOAP note sequencing, teaching your reps the SOAP note concept, that's how the prescribers or clinicians think. It helps them have that conversation much more productive, in a more productive manner. Always ask for feedback. A lot of times we're data dumping our information and our compounds and our services to our prescribers, but we don't really leave it at that. We don't really have very good closers. So one thing that we need to improve on is actually to ask the doctor if they actually agree with your solution, asking for feedback. If they say yes, fantastic, you move on and you close it. Say, at what point do you think we can start seeing prescriptions? Yes, it's salesy, but it also calls out to say, okay, this is actually a physician or a healthcare practitioner that would say that this qualifies for therapy. If the physician objects or says, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get you that prescription, then you start going into an obstacle handling mindset to understand why the physician's not completely confirmed on moving forward. Regardless, once you come to a resolution with the healthcare professional, don't forget to ask and close the conversation. Let them know what the next steps are, remind them who's got the actionables, and then let them know and start to assign some timestamps to that as well, letting them know when you're going to follow up, when they can expect to follow up. And I will say following up is key, because again, the level of interest does decrease over time. This is not an official graph by any standards. This is our perception on what we've seen over time, is that typically over 5 weeks, if you haven't followed up with a prescriber in 5 weeks, their level of interest went from 100% down to essentially less than 20% chance of them converting to an active prescriber. So finally, as we wrap up, looking at the assessment of the assessment of outcome of campaigns, we need to find out if all the other plans that we developed are actually working. So let's take a look at some tools. Again, looking at the campaigns from your sales rep, what we do in the form of a weekly, you'll see here it's a weekly reporting. And ideally, you want this automated. There are some CRM systems that are out there that can actually produce and send you reports to see how well your reps are doing, how many leads were touched in any given week, how many qualified leads were touched in the same week, and opportunities, and how many active prescribers. And you can actually run a report if you have a sophisticated CRM system to kind of give you that number, so your reps don't have to present that back to you. It's interesting, again, for us, the conversion rates are always key. We want to see how successful our reps are, not in terms of just the quantity, but it also gives us a good indication of the quality. So if somebody says that they're doing a great job and they see a lot of qualified leads and there's a high conversion rate from qualified leads to opportunities, but the opportunities aren't turning into active prescribers, well, we know that this rep is having a hard time closing the deal. And so at that point, typically we'll do a ride along with the rep to make sure that they understand on actually how to close the deal and get the business. And then finally enough, is there enough qualified leads to fill the pipeline? You always look at your qualified leads. Sometimes that happens where you think, oh, all these prescribers can write for Magic Goo, when in fact only 50% of them. So taking a look at that pipeline to give your reps a fair expectation is key as well. Here's what we do in terms of our weekly huddle, and I can show you, if this pulls up, one of the attachments that we have. But this is a weekly activity report from reps. So we do expect our reps to share about 10 minutes on how many visits they engaged in last week, how many conference calls they had last week, and the outcome of last week's appointments. Typically, this is done first thing Monday morning. And then again, we ask those reps within that same 10 minutes, how many visits do they have this week? How many conference calls do we have this week? It is interesting because those reps do, we purposely have all the reps to report so everybody can listen to everybody else. And you can kind of see who reps are competitive. They can say, okay, I've called on 30 practices. My other rep called on 50 practices last week. I need to up my game. But from, again, a management perspective on a weekly huddle, we need to look at their actual activity compared to projected activity that you've outlined in strategic plan. And that's actually a good assessment to see how effective your strategic plan is as well. Also, weekly huddle, we don't get into specific details, but we do ask our reps to line up what they got campaigned for the next 30, 60, 90 days. We want to make sure that when they're not on the road, they're in the home office, that they're continuing to lay pavement and move forward in their sales activity, including conferences that are coming up, including interfacing with the marketing team. Each month, management looks at recent campaign success per rep per month. It's a little bit more of an additional deep dive into see what revenue came in. This is usually a little bit more of a revenue generated conversation to see how effective are we getting our return on investment. And then finally, we look at updated campaigns again for the next 30, 60, 90 days from overall to see if our overall reps are in line with their own expectations. So just to look at some additional tools, we highly recommend getting a CRM system. There's definitely a whole bunch of kind of CRMs that are out there. I would say really the simpler the better, with the caveat that hopefully a CRM system has the ability to send you a report that we mentioned earlier, a weekly report about the pipeline. And then pulling your pharmacy software system, and if anybody uses PK, if you haven't accessed it, they have a data mining tool that's actually pretty effective that spits out that data. So if you haven't done so, if you don't have it, think about asking PK to implement a data mining tool, which gives you the ability to run prescription and revenue reports over a certain period of time. You could segment it by who wrote or even where it was written. Ideally, those reports are provided by somebody. It's a weekly report, so you know well how financially you're doing on a weekly basis, and it also gives you additional revenue reporting as well. Sales team development is always key. You want to put money into your sales team. Obviously, what we talked about today is sort of a high level in different departments, but one thing that we looked at is hiring somebody to come in to teach us, which is great, but it's actually quite expensive. There are certain educational series on LinkedIn that we've noticed to hire that has been beneficial, and some of them have actually been free. Leverage your commission plans as part of the motivation as well. Having that sales rep understand what their expectations are can be leveraged in the commission plans. And I will say it's funny because historically our commission plans have always been revenue generated, but now because of COVID, we still want to incentivize our reps to get on the road. So we actually have an activity plan carve out that's part of the overall commission plan. So if they meet their certain activity expectations, to let practices know that we're here. A lot of the practices, especially with COVID, are looking to our sales rep to say, hey, you know, I've been shut down for 2 months. Now's the time for me to revamp my business model or my practice model. What else can I offer my physician or my patients? Your sales reps are actually could be an asset in helping them identify conferences to attend, seminars, network with other prescribers and physicians to identify what services are being provided in the manner that they're being provided. Finally, just a miscellaneous where to hire. Look inside your own pharmacy. Some of our best reps are actually technicians. And I will say, ironically, you think big pharma reps would be beneficial. They've gone through the rigorous training process, but it's just a different fundamental mindset. They're selling products and we're selling a service. And the reps that we did hire from big pharma for us didn't work as well as, say, other sources, say our own techs or even of representatives from physicians' offices. So that's about it. On behalf of APC, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time today. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes left in today's presentation, and I'm going to open it up for questions here. Somebody asked, can you recommend a favorite CRM? Yeah, so we used to use Salesforce. Unfortunately, it was pretty expensive and it was almost too big for us as a pharmacy. So we use another one. It's called Insightly, INSIGHTLY, and it's much more cost effective. It's much simpler to use, and that's one that's worked out well for us. Somebody asked, how long did it take for you to develop your pharmacy sales plan? Well, the plan itself took essentially 13 years just to develop the concept of it. But in terms of the sales strategic plan, it takes us about 3 days in the fourth quarter to get ready for a successful 2021. Do you have a recommendation on the number of sales staff for pharmacy size, market, et cetera? That's actually a great question. That's a reflection of what you're looking to promote, what products would qualify, and then looking at your market. So it really needs to go back to what you're comfortable producing. Can you produce a sterile product? Can you produce just a non-sterile product? And then identifying the market size for that. Before you need all those pieces of information before you can even develop a successful sales plan. Another question here. What is the best way to get qualified leads on the phone? Yeah, that's a great question, and that really goes back towards our marketing efforts. And so I think we're going to have another series on marketing efforts, but softening, if you will, softening the market to let them know of our existence has been very, very beneficial. The call to action, that marketing, is to have them reach out to our pharmacy team to advise them of their level of interest. And so at the top of the hour, I kind of talked about the importance of having a sales team and the operations team work together. In this case, you really want your marketing efforts to be that your team understands what your marketing efforts are as well. So if you're doing email blasts to let them know of your existence, that phone call typically comes back into your pharmacy operations side. They typically Google your pharmacy name, they see the 800 number, they dial that. So getting your operations team as part of the sales process is key, and then they can identify who needs to take that call to the next level. But as soon as that person calls back and has expressed interest, they do satisfy the definition of a qualified lead. Someone asked a good question. What do you talk about on your second, third, or fourth visit? Linford, that's a great question. What we do is that we take, it's a continuous process. So we'll take that initial question, that initial meeting with the doctor, and do a follow-up. So we'll do a recap of the previous meeting, literally in 30 seconds, thank them, remind the physician that they did express interest, remind them the reasons why they expressed interest, and then talk about a little bit more pointed conversation about what they can do for their prescribers. And so for us, if we are able to get back to second or third meeting, at that time you should be able to close the deal, and your rep should be confident to say, all right, we do need to start seeing prescriptions. Because if you're having your third meeting, you've probably had your 8th encounter if you think about it, because you sent up follow-up emails, you're sending up additional emails to set your agenda. If you're on your 4th visit with the prescriber and they're not quite ready to order yet, the rep has a business decision to make. Am I best served coming back for a 5th meeting, or am I better served contacting another one? going in a different direction. And it's a tough thing to do because you're on your fourth visit. You've probably spent about 3 weeks of effort contacting that prescriber, working with that prescriber. But if they haven't been able to pull the trigger, you may find yourself better suited to go in a different direction. And that's okay to say that to the prescriber. Say, I understand you're not interested in moving forward this time, or you still have some hesitations. I'll come back with you at a later time. Just mark them, keep them in the qualified lead status for the time being, and perhaps circle back with them in the next quarter. Have time for a couple more questions. How many leads per sales rep do you think is appropriate? Oh man, that's a great question. It really is tied to what the level of effort is for that sales rep. So, you know, at our pharmacy here, we have certain, you know, let's just pick on women's health. You know, that's a straightforward one. Most of the prescribers understand it. It's a well-established market. Prescribers already know about bioidentical hormones. A lot of them do, I should say. They may not be comfortable ordering it, but at least they understand it. So, but that type, you know, you have a large market that you can work with that transcends multiple therapeutic areas. So if you have a rep that's focused on, let's say, bioidentical hormone sales activity, they can call on OBGYNs, integrated practices, and urologists. You're going to expect that rep to have a portfolio of probably 400 or 500 physicians in their lead or qualified lead. Obviously, if you have an active list of 500 physicians, that's a lot for a pharmacy rep to handle. The other piece is, and we do struggle with this, is how much bandwidth can that rep take on, even with their active prescribers. And so if you have a physician list and they have 250 to 300 physicians, active physicians per rep, that's a lot of activity for the rep. And you probably wouldn't expect them to generate additional new business development. So as a pharmacy owner, you have a business decision to make. Okay, do I split this activity and have my rep go capture new business and then hire an account manager, perhaps like a technician, repurpose them to call on the current 250 doctors to make sure you don't lose them. There's a strategy we implemented a couple of years ago called block and tackle. So it's blocking the loss of a physician to go to a competitor, and that's usually handled by our account managers. And the tackles were assigned to our new business development rep, which are the ones to go capture new business. I hope that answered your question. Paul, are medical liaisons faring well with the Zoom or other foreign-based meetings with prescribers post-COVID? So I've talked to a couple of colleagues about this, and they've had success. I'm going to tell you right now, we haven't. We've had a couple. If they are an active prescriber and they've been with us and they trust us, they don't really need us to come to their office. Yeah, I would say that works. But for new business development, those physicians are scrambling to see their patients. Accessing Zoom for them takes longer than actually having the call. We've tried that and it hasn't worked as well for us as we had hoped. So we've kind of gone back to the old days of just literally like a better description, we're bird dogging, getting out on the road to see what practices are open now because of COVID and see if they'll actually have a few minutes of their time. So somebody asked about a good sales staff should be paid and their commission structure. We got a few questions on that one. You know, that's a good question, and there's different philosophies to this. We've sort of taken a balanced approach to whatever the total compensation is for us. We kind of think of it as a 50-50. The way that we're structured is that we have our expectations for most of our reps right now is to go call on new accounts. And that's where they're going to generate the revenue, but also because they've already established relationships with a lot of prescribers, we do want them to go back into the current accounts and work with them. And they may not generate additional revenue from seeing an active prescriber that's been with us for 5 or 6 years, but we justify them going back into their because we are paying them at least a base salary. You can look at commission rates and salaries online just to make sure that we're keeping everything on the up and up here, but I would advise just Googling reps. The overall formula that we've seen though is whatever you're paying a rep, that should not exceed 10 to 15%, assuming you have similar profit margins as some of your typical compounds of your overall portfolio. So if that rep has a book, your goal is to make sure that that rep only represents 10 to 15% of the accounts that they're calling on. In terms of actual revenue that those accounts are bringing in. Amy, I think we're at the top of the hour. Do you want me to continue to go, or should we answer a couple more?
If you'd like to answer a couple more, sure, go right ahead.
Okay. let's see here. What is the average number of scripts per doctor per year in the Magic Goo example to make 250? Yeah, so sorry, Paul, I may have gone over that pretty quick, but that assumption was just if you have a prescriber that writes 2 prescriptions a week, and then the patients would do a refill at least one time because it's a 6 to 8 week treatment protocol. They would do a refill. So that prescriber would be responsible in total for about 4 prescriptions per week times the number of weeks. That was, I think it was 208, and then you multiply that times your average price point per script, and that winds up being how much we expect that rep to bring in for the revenue, which I think in that case was 250,000. Let's see here. Okay, somebody asked, how many sales reps did you start with, and how many did you have now? Back in 2007, I was the only sales rep. I was calling on the physician's offices. I hired a part-time pharmacist to hold the fort, typically about 15 hours per week. Right now, we have a sales and marketing team that's about 13 to 14 folks. I think that's about it. Some of these questions are similar. Hopefully, I captured them all, Amy. But I think we're good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean, for a fantastic session. This was great. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. The evaluation link to obtain CE credit is found on the last slide of the presentation handout. The slides will also be included in a follow-up email today along with the recording, and this session will also be available on demand. Thank you very much for attending today's session, and have a good day.